Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to ITI's latest virtual event. We call it Security in the Face of Rapidly Evolving Cyber Threats. My name is Jason Oxman. I'm the president and CEO of ITI, the trade association of the technology industry. And on behalf of the entire ITI team and our 80 member companies, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today for this timely and critical discussion with an exciting slate of speakers. Security is, of course, a shared responsibility for all of us, from individuals to corporations to governments, and requires a commitment from all parties to adopting practices and protections to guard networks, systems, facilities, and devices from foreign or domestic criminal threats. Today, I'm delighted and honored to introduce our guest speaker, Senator Gary Peters, who is chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee in the U.S. Senate. He's here today to talk to us about these important topics. We'll also be joined by industry experts who I'll introduce to you in a few minutes, who will comment on the events of the day and the cybersecurity policy issues that we all are interested in and working on tirelessly. This event is streamed live today on YouTube, and a recording will be available on our YouTube channel afterward. We, of course, encourage you to participate in the discussion using our hashtag #BridgeForInnovation online. And now let me introduce Senator Gary Peters. Senator Peters has represented the state of Michigan in the United States Senate since 2015. He is, of course, the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, which oversees, importantly, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. This committee is also the Senate's top oversight committee as well. Senator Peters also serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. He's also a member of the Senate Ukraine Caucus. It is, of course, critical, we all know, for the public and the private sectors to work collaboratively, to coordinate, to complement efforts to minimize exposure and risk. And a critical part of this policy is evolving to meet the moment, to protect citizens, to protect infrastructure, to protect institutions. And Senator Peters is at the core of the efforts in the U.S. Senate to do just that. He has provided key leadership and notable accomplishments on legislation such as the Deepfakes Task Force Act. This month, a landmark provision that he authored to significantly enhance our nation's ability to combat cybersecurity threats against critical infrastructure. That measure became law. We are proud to applaud Senator Peters for his leadership on issues of major importance to the tech industry. We congratulate him on these important accomplishments. And without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Senator Peters here to our event today. Senator, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for that very warm introduction, and certainly thank you for your leadership and your organization's leadership on this issue and so many for the tech industry. So thank you for having me on today.
Well, we're delighted to have you. It's a crucial moment for a variety of different topics that are under your jurisdiction and the work that you're doing in the committee, and we're pleased to have the opportunity to hear directly from you today. You obviously have access to an incredible amount of information and assessments about the cyber threats that are facing our nation, some of which I know you can share with us, some of which I know you can't, but we've heard very clearly from you and from the Biden administration this week about the threat landscape. Really, we've heard alarms sounded across town and around the country this week about threats to U.S. critical infrastructure. I want to start off by asking you what you're most concerned about, what you're calling on industry to be paying attention to about these threats to government infrastructure, to organizations and businesses.
Well, you're right. We are, I believe we're in a dangerous time right now. But of course, I want to put it in perspective, and all of your members agree, we're always in a dangerous time when it comes to cyber attacks and cyber threats. So among all of the issues that we deal with Homeland Security, and as you mentioned, there are many, from the rise of violent extremism to other challenges that we have. There's no question that cyber is probably one of our biggest threats to the homeland. And so we have to be focused on this constantly. We know the bad guys are constantly figuring out ways to change their tactics as we respond. It's an evolving threat. It becomes increasingly serious. And there's no question now Given the fact that the Russians are always engaged in attacks in the homeland in the United States, either state supported or criminal organizations that are in Russia, majority of all of those in Russia, often getting a kind of a wink and a nod from the government to be engaged in attacks globally, not just the United States. But now, given what's happening in Ukraine, we've got to expect more to happen, particularly as Mr. Putin continues to be stalled in his efforts, thanks to the amazing courage of the Ukrainian people who are fighting back on the ground. But we would expect that cyber will be coming. So the president put out that warning, make sure that everybody is on high alert, came from CISA as well and other agencies to go forward. And keeping me awake to your question, it's not just critical infrastructure, as important as that is, and we know the impact that can have, but it's also small businesses. So the bad guys will always go for the kind of the softest target. And I think about constantly the fact that the U.S. National Cybersecurity Alliance put out a statistic that 60% of small businesses that suffer a cyber attack or a ransomware attack in particular will be out of business within a year or 18 months, somewhere in that range. So we could see a great deal of disruption. And that's why I think it's incumbent for us to be getting legislation out. You mentioned my cyber incident reporting bill. That was incredibly important to get out. We can talk about that at length if you'd like. But we've also put in cyber recovery response in our bipartisan infrastructure package to provide resources to entities that are hit by these to try to get back up and running as quickly as possible, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure. But we also have to harden hospitals. We have to harden K-12 schools that have a lot of sensitive information. I was able to write and pass our K-12 Cybersecurity Act. And so I guess it's kind of all of the above what you worry about. Which is why we have to act quickly and expeditiously, and why it's so important for us to have a very open dialogue, which is why I'm so happy we're here today, a very open dialogue between private industry and government. We have to work together. We're not going to be able to do this separately, and this is certainly an important discussion, and I welcome more in-depth and kind of in the weeds discussions of how the federal government can assist the private industry to protect your systems, and in the process, protect our economy and our national security.
Well, we're grateful for your attention to that and your leadership, and congratulations to you on this incident reporting provision in the Strengthening American Cybersecurity Act that you mentioned that the president has signed into law. I think it's interesting, we talk a lot about the need to secure infrastructure, but one thing that you've been very focused on and is now a provision of law is the requirement that operators of critical infrastructure not only secure their infrastructure, but also report on cyber attacks that they suffer, so we have good access to information. So I want to ask you why you think these incident reporting provisions are so important. And I also want to ask you, as a corollary to that, an update, if you would, on some other provisions of that legislation that I know were incredibly important to you. The Federal Information Security Modernization Act, for example, which ITI and our member companies have been advocates for. You're looking for a lot of reforms to how the federal government does security and looking for modernization efforts. Wanted to get an update on that from you as well.
Absolutely, and thanks for the question. The legislation that we were able to pass through the Senate was initially, and then now some of it into law, as you mentioned in your opening comments, and that's the cyber incident reporting aspect. But we also had FISMA reform to rewrite, or not to rewrite, but to modernize basically that legislation related to the government, and FedRAMP for cloud computing. So we have all three of those in legislation that passed out of the Senate unanimously, I'm happy to say. For folks who say we can't come together and work in a bipartisan way, this is a pretty substantial piece of legislation that passed in a bipartisan way, but it passed the Senate, still had to go through the House, but we believed it was absolutely essential that we get the cyber incident reporting bill into law as quickly as possible. And we seized that opportunity with our omnibus budget bill to be able to put that in and to get it written into law and now in effect. And why I think it's so important, and I think all your members will agree, is that we have to understand the lay of the land. This goes back, we're in my armed services hat now, or my Navy background. When you go into battle, the most important thing going into battle is having situational awareness. You have to know the lay of the land. You have to know where the enemy is. You have to know what kind of equipment they have, what their force structure is. You have to have an understanding of where friendly forces are. You can't be successful in battle without situational awareness. And that's what this bill is. It gives us situational awareness. In a committee or a hearing in my committee, both CISA and the FBI said this was the most important thing. They estimated that perhaps we only know maybe 30% of the actual attacks, because for a variety of reasons, people don't want to report those attacks, give us information. And if we don't have that information, we can't have a coordinated response and prepare for that. And also importantly, warn others that this is happening. This is about protecting our industry partners all across the country, saying, hey, these attacks are occurring. You always prepared, but be on the lookout for this specifically. So, I've always given the example of a burglar in a neighborhood. If you have a burglar in your neighborhood, you want to know that, because you want to make sure you're locking your door because a burglar is targeted, and you want to make sure the police are driving through your neighborhoods more. So this situational awareness is essential to get that information in, which will protect us. But we can't stop there. We want to do the FISMA reform and the FedRAMP legislation. We're in discussions with the House right now. And we're very close, I think, to coming up to an agreement to be able to put these two together. And I'm hoping we can get it passed as quickly as possible. And certainly with the warnings that have been made public, including from the president yesterday, we should make sure we have every tool in the toolbox as quickly as possible to make sure we're protecting the homeland.
Well, we appreciate your efforts there, and we look forward to continuing to support your work on that IT modernization legislation. And one of the things I know you're also focused on is making sure there is a coordinated whole of government response when in the event of a cyber attack. You have oversight responsibility from your committee chairmanship for CISA. And I know you've been working hard to make sure that CISA is the lead agency to coordinate after cyber attacks and to lead the response to cybersecurity incidents on federal civilian networks as well. At the same time, there are a lot of federal agencies, a lot of arms of government involved. Ranging from the FBI to, we have a new national cyber director. Even the Securities and Exchange Commission just came out with new incident reporting requirements. Can you talk about the importance from your perspective of the role of CISA and the lead role that CISA should play, in your view, on this issue?
Well, I think it's an incredibly important point. And you mentioned a number of agencies that are involved in cyber protection, and they all, let me be clear on the record, they all play a vital part of all of this. And we want to strengthen their ability to be able to protect systems, to work with private industry, work together. But in my view, we have to have coordination, and part of that is I don't want folks to have to report incidents to multiple government agencies. How do we kind of cut through the bureaucracy that is endemic with a large organization like the federal government? The whole idea in my mind, and why I think CISA should be the focal point, and why it was written into the cyber incident reporting bill, is that we want industry to see CISA as a partner, as a helpful hand that you're going to want to report, because CISA is going to be able to provide tools and assistance and resources to help you navigate. You also know when you report to CISA, it's going to put up a shield with the economy at large, because we're going to know where we are, back to my situational awareness comments that I made in the previous question. And so how do we streamline things? How do we break down silos? It's one of the biggest frustrations for me, and that's why the FISMA bill is so important, is you have all these silos, everybody does things, you get duplication, you get there's lack of coordination. It's not the way to run a business. It's not the way to run what has to be a kind of a Homeland Security defense force has to work in a coordinated way with clear lines of command and control, but do it in a way that's helpful, a way that assists the business. We have a cyber incident reporting council that was established in the incident reporting law, and that's going to work to continue to harmonize all of this so we can work in a more coordinated way. And CISA is uniquely positioned, and we hope that will continue to evolve. But we're always open to industry input too, as to how we make the system work better, so people actively seek out the help, because federal government's actually there with something of value.
And I think CISA has heard that message that you've endeavored to convey to them. The launch of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the JCDC, seems to be moving in the direction that you're talking about, deepening the partnership really between industry and government. Do you think the JCDC will help accomplish those goals of opening those lines of communication and deepening the work and the impact of the public-private partnership model for cybersecurity?
I do, and I'm very pleased, and I applaud CISA for standing it up. We know it could be a very valuable resource. So if we're responding incidents like the Log4j vulnerability that came out, it's going to play a very, very important role in both leveraging the speed and the modernization of technology necessary for us to be able to respond to this in a coordinated way. So I think it's a very important step, and I'm pleased to see that.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about this is we've heard actually publicly concerns raised by the FBI and DOJ about their own authorities and their role in incident reporting at the same time that CISA stands up these additional capabilities. I just wondered if you had any comment on what FBI and DOJ have raised as their concerns.
Well, I want to be clear that I support, I think I said this at the beginning, I support the mission of other cyber or other agencies that are engaged in cybersecurity, and certainly the Department of Justice and the FBI play a critical mission. And it is about deterrence. It's about going after bad actors. And that's something that we definitely have to strengthen in addition to putting stronger locks on the door. Going back to my example of the burglar in town, it's not just about putting stronger locks on the door, as important as that is, but you want the burglar to know that if they do break in, they're going to get caught and they're going to be punished and they're going to be held accountable. So we definitely need that role for the FBI, and folks have to know that it's not just about designing a better way to get in through the locks, but there could be more repercussions and accountability for that. And CISA will share information. So FBI and the Department of Justice will get information. CISA will share information appropriately with other federal agencies, which certainly includes the FBI and the Department of Justice. But again, back to my other earlier statement too, I want entities to be encouraged to also feel protected when they're disclosing cyber incidents to CISA. It's important to get folks who will reach out to CISA and let them know that they're being attacked. They're going to be protected with that information, or when they're providing that information, and they're going to get assistance. That's the way we build the kinds of partnerships that I think are necessary to deal with this significant threat that we all face.
So now that incident reporting legislation has been signed into law and the implementation is underway, what's the next big cybersecurity issue you want Congress to tackle?
Well, it's I'm just focusing on the short term here. Clearly, is the FISMA and FedRAMP. I want to get that done. So we are totally focused on that right now. And I would encourage folks who are listening to reach out to their respective senators and House members and stress how important this legislation is in the overall framework of how we build cyber defenses in this country. So we got a lot of other work to do that we're going to lean into. But right now, I just want to be focused on getting these two bills that are very far along and are so close to the finish line. And you know what I find in Congress, being close to the finish line doesn't necessarily mean you're close to getting it done, unless you get a little extra push. And clearly, I hope the push with what we're seeing with the Russian attack on Ukraine and the threats that we're going to face in our country, I hope that gives us the extra push. But would encourage your members to help reach out and let people know how important this is.
We absolutely will, and we appreciate your helping us hear the message to move that forward. And one thing that is also happening with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law and enactment by the president is you were instrumental in securing funding for state, local, and tribal governments, over $1 billion in funding specifically to advance hardening systems to protect against malicious cyber actors. What are you looking for as you watch implementation as this money flows to state, local, tribal governments? What are you looking for those governmental entities to utilize these resources to best protect against future attacks?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. And I worked with Senator Hassan on this provision as well to secure this funding. And And basically, we're expecting each state to identify their own needs. And those needs will be different depending on the state, from whether it's modernization of information, technology systems, instituting multi-factor authentication and deploying security tools. Every state will put together a plan, but we want to see them actually using that. And that's the thing that I've mentioned too earlier with small businesses, for example, where they're very particularly vulnerable. We want to make sure that there are strategies being put in place to protect all of the links of the chain when it comes to the cybersecurity chain. I would also hope clearly that state and local governments would use this funding to secure their election infrastructure, to make sure the election infrastructure is impervious as much as possible to any kind of manipulation or attacks. It's fundamental to our democracy that we have safe and fair elections. I was pleased to have the CISA director talk about the last election, which was the most secure election in history from a cyber perspective. We want to be able to continue to build on that and make sure in the future that that's in place. But I'd also want states and locals to take advantage of other services and other programs of CISA, and those are our multi-state information sharing systems, whether the MS-ISAC or the EI-ISAC as well. These are all vital tools. Hopefully they'll be fully utilized, and all these resources should help facilitate all of that.
And one of the things we know that is impending, and we've heard the alarm raised this week, is about the potential for cyber attacks coming from Russia in particular. And I know this is something you pay close attention to, and you've been very outspoken in support of the U.S. government's work to aid Ukrainians. You're a member of the Senate Ukraine caucus. I know there are tens of thousands of your constituents in Michigan who have Ukrainian descent. What are you watching for? What would you like the industry to be paying attention to specifically as to the cyber risk from Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would hope everyone takes CISA's Shields Up alert, very, very seriously. This is very real. It's actually somewhat surprising that we haven't seen more cyber attacks. It's not what we anticipated, particularly attacks even in Ukraine. There's a lot of speculation as to why that's happening right now, and part of it is because you have boots on the ground and tanks and artillery. A kinetic force is what's engaged in Ukraine. But I would not take that as any indication of what the future may be. We know the Russians are very capable with cyber attacks. We expect that they will do that. And Putin has basically said anybody who's assisting the Ukrainian effort for their freedom could be and will be a potential target. So we have to be ready. CISA is certainly encouraging companies to update software immediately, to validate remote access from their networks, to disable all ports and protocols that aren't needed for their business. I think folks have to take that seriously and put additional resources on that task if they're able to do that and do it quickly. And certainly companies that do business in Russia, Ukraine, or Eastern Europe definitely need to critically assess their posture in these countries and use CISA's guidance. We all have to link arms right now. This is a serious situation, and we have to do everything we can together to protect the homeland.
Mr. Chairman, you've been very generous with your time. I just have one last question I want to ask you before I know we have to let you go, and that is about the workforce that supports all of these efforts to protect the homeland against cyber attacks. We hear a lot about cybersecurity companies, and we're about to talk to the CEO of one of our member companies who deals with this issue of trying to find talent. There's a huge amount of demand for cybersecurity jobs, and I know this is something that you're focused on as well. I wanted to ask for your thoughts before we end our time together about what we can do as an industry to support your efforts to develop a cyber workforce.
Well, I think it is absolutely central. Obviously, all of these systems are only as good as the people that are there operating them, and we need a whole lot more people. And I think it's important for us to focus not just on cybersecurity professionals who are just in that field, but really make sure that people who are in any way related to information technology, that they also understand that they also need to be cyber protection professionals as well. So that means expanding curriculum in schools as well. They should be teaching cybersecurity and secure coding practices, in my mind, as just part of their computer science curriculums. This has to be integrated in everything we're doing and thinking about. And also recruiting folks that may not have that kind of background, but be open to other backgrounds that give people some of the basic skills to be able to pick these new skills up more rapidly. So casting a wider net of folks who are going to be engaged. And I'm also thinking a lot about how do we retain a federal workforce, a cyber workforce, which is critically important. How do we enhance the professionalism and their own intellectual development? An example of that, I have legislation to create a federal rotational cyber workforce. It's passed the Senate. We're hoping to get it signed into law early, which will also allow cyber professionals to hopefully break down some of the silos, allow them to go to different departments. If you're a cyber professional, the Department of Transportation, and then go over to the Department of Health and Human Services, take your best practices from DOT to the other department, learn their best practices, and build the kind of connections and networks. You'll know people. You know, it goes back to how we want to have all of government and harmonize and break down silos. I think it's important for cyber professionals to be able to have those opportunities. Similar to my experience in the U.S. military, if you're going to go to a flag rank or a high level, you need to have experience in joint forces. If you're a naval officer, you also need to know how the Air Force fights and how the Army fights and others, because we're all in this together. That kind of perspective is critically important for cyber professionals as well who are in this fight. So this has to be, I think, a key component for the federal government, and certainly I think something for private industry to be considering as well. And the response from cyber professionals has been incredibly positive. It adds to the intellectual challenge that people already take when you're in this industry, and takes it to a new level.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, you have been enormously generous with your time on a day that I know there's a lot going on, and we appreciate your leadership on these important issues to secure the homeland. Appreciate your call to action to the technology industry to help advance important legislation, and we appreciate your time with us today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jason. Always a privilege to be on with you, and thank you so much. And again, thank you for your leadership.
Absolutely, and good luck to I know your constituents will all be glued to the television tomorrow night. Good luck to Michigan in the game tomorrow night.
Go Blue.
Thank you, sir. All right, we continue our conversation on the important cybersecurity industry topics. I am delighted and honored to welcome our next speaker today, who is truly a leader, a pioneer, and an innovator in cybersecurity. Ken Xie is the founder, chairman, and CEO of ITI member company Fortinet, which is a global cybersecurity leader. Fortinet's broad portfolio of solutions serves 70% of the Fortune 100 and governments around the world. It's a security-driven networking approach, and it combines security networking and AI to deliver protection. And we are honored to have Ken with us today to talk about the intersection of the policy issues with the business issues that we face in the cybersecurity realm. So Ken Xie, welcome to our event, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And also thank you for Senator Peters and also all the ITI member. It's very important. Happy to join this important topic and this very critical time.
Well, we appreciate your being here because obviously cybersecurity is much in focus, and Fortinet and the work that you and your team are doing on these issues are enormously important to protecting critical infrastructure. So I wanted to start off by asking you about Fortinet's innovation approach and R&D in particular. Senator Peters talked about the need for more technology innovation, and you're very focused on that in cybersecurity. What is the R&D focus in the cybersecurity realm at Fortinet that's happening right now?
Yeah, it's cybersecurity has been a very dynamic industry, and also growing very fast in the last 30 years I involved. You can see is no one really dominant in this space because a lot of new things come up, everything kind of keeping changing. So that's where for the company involved, definitely innovation is very, very important, follow up the change. So that's how we, Fortinet want the culture very important, really keep up the internal innovation, a lot of long-term investment. So that's really follow the change in the space and quickly respond to anything challenging, anything kind of threatening the whole cybersecurity or anything is very critical. So that's where invest in the long-term R&D and also make sure have the technology can catch up all the change in the space is very critical, like the ASIC investment, like all the other, we call the fabric investment that make sure all the different products can working together, automate together, all the AI machine learning, all this is very, very important in the industry.
And I wonder how you make the case to your customers that investing in security is as important as investing in performance. Because of course, in the technology industry, it's all about speed. It's all about increased network capabilities. But security is equally important. And obviously, Fortinet is making the argument to its customers that it is as important to invest in addressing the security challenges as it is in addressing the demand for increased network performance. How do you make that case about the importance of security investments as well?
Yeah, Fortinet founded like 22 years ago. One of the vision we have is what we call the security-driven networking. Because you can look at how the internet today, we still pretty much using the same protocol we invented like 40, 50 years ago. All the networking is all about connectivity and speed. So that's caused a lot of issue today because 30, 40 years ago, when networking evolved, started, it's pretty much in the same trust environment, connect different university, government entity together. But today you can see internet starting to connect to everybody else. And also they starting to connect to a lot of devices, all different applications, a lot of important data. All this starting to go through internet. So that's really needs some kind of a different trust level environment. A lot of talk about, we call the zero trust environment. We also talk about how the networking needs to be addressed, the higher layer, like application layer, like the content layer, the user layer, the device layer, which the networking cannot address, really have to go through security. So that's why we say security-driven networking is very, very critical, very, very important, especially Senator Peters talked about the ransomware attack. So we also from our own study, like a ransomware attack up 11 times compared to 1 year ago. It's a lot of companies that didn't suffer ransomware attack. As we estimate almost 70% companies that didn't suffer some kind of ransomware attack. So all this because internally, in the past, network security mostly secure the border, secure the gate. Come into the company, but internally it's pretty much very, very open. You can, once you get in, you can pretty much go to anywhere. But if you can do the security-driven networking approach, you can secure different important server, different department, and make sure you have visibility for the whole infrastructure. That's what making the whole infrastructure much more secure.
Chairman Peters also talked a lot about the shared responsibility between the private sector and the government to address these cybersecurity threats. Can you talk to us about Fortinet's approach, how you see that collaboration between the public and the private sectors working today?
Yeah, cybersecurity industry is very important to have a private public sector working together. Because a lot of a different role they each can play, make the whole cybersecurity more safe. Fortinet is the founding member, the first member. We call the CTA, the Cyber Threat Alliance, with 30 plus leading company in the industry to share all the intelligence information and also to help each other to quickly respond to all the cyber attack. We also work on the worldwide level with what economic forum there. So we're the first founding member of they call the Center for Cybersecurity. And also we're working closely with all other like a different agency, different government to share all the intelligence information and helping quickly battle all these cyber attacks, cyber war right now.
We've also seen those cyber attacks attack a lot of different sectors. We think of attacks on critical infrastructure. We've also seen the education sector, healthcare sector, energy sectors, a lot of malware attacks, denial of service attacks. You mentioned ransomware attacks. We know that we have to pay attention to cybersecurity across all industries. As these attack surfaces, as you mentioned, grow. How is the private sector evolving to protect this growing attack surface?
Definitely, there's a few areas the private sector can help in improving all this safety in all these different industry on the cybersecurity space there. First, I think it's a lot of industry still like underinvest in some cybersecurity. And that's also help them make sure how to secure the infrastructure and how to make sure if anything happens, they can quickly respond is very, very important. And the other thing really, we also lead an effort to try to train in the workforce because there's a big shortage of people know the cybersecurity. That's also very, very important. So we have a lot of programs. We actually have the biggest training program in the industry. We call the network security expert. There's 8 different levels. So we already train about 1 million people. We also commit to train another 1 million people in the next few years. Because there's a huge shortage in this, people know cybersecurity. So the training has to be goes through like a K-12, the college, the workforce, the veteran, the women, all these kind of things. Once they understand the cybersecurity importance of that, then they can really apply the technology, apply all this knowledge to help them secure their infrastructure better. On the other side, also the company also need to be working together. So there's so many companies in the cybersecurity, sometimes competitor, but we also have to working together, not with each other, but also with the public sector, with research, with education, academic there, to make sure this whole industry can really quickly respond and make the whole internet infrastructure better, safer, secure.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, and you alluded to it, is the people, and a reminder that it is people, unfortunately, who very often are responsible for that growing attack surface because they make mistakes. And I wanted to ask you about the efforts that Fortinet is making around training and addressing that human element through your training efforts. What are the challenges from the workforce perspective on addressing the people element of these cyber risks?
Yeah, the training also quite important because, like I said, it's a very cybersecurity, very fast developing, changing, very dynamic space. A lot of new knowledge has to be learned every year, and that's where how to train the people, not only anyone new in the space, but also even someone already in the space for many years also need to be keeping learning, keeping training. So we offer, we call the network security expert level training. It's free training. You can do it online, and there's different test level. And there's over 500 universities working with us using the program to train all the students, and also a lot of other like different enterprise company also goes through this training. That's where once everybody understand how the cybersecurity important to their business and how to react if they get like a spam email, certain kind of a phishing attack, they can understand how to identify them, how to respond to them. And if there's any security issue, they know how to deal with that. That's also very critical, very important to contain and to reduce any damage the cybersecurity incident may happen there.
Sounds like very important training, and it's great that you provide it online and it's available to all. Ken Xie is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Fortinet. Ken, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Yes, thank you, Jason. It's a very important working with an organization like ITI to really make sure the whole industry understand the importance of cybersecurity. And also thank you for your leadership, and appreciate organizing this great event.
Well, thank you for your support of ITI, and we appreciate your taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. We're going to continue our conversation on the subject of public and private sector coordination and collaboration with Jeanette Manfra, who is Senior Director of Global Risk and Compliance at Google Cloud. Jeanette, we are delighted to have you with us today. Prior to joining Google, Jeanette was the Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at CISA, the agency that we've heard talked about so much today. And she also spent more than a decade in various roles in the Department of Homeland Security and the White House as she focused on establishing the nation's first civilian cyber defense agency. Jeanette, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and you bring a unique perspective to our conversation today, having worked in both the public and the private sector. And you've had a chance to hear from Senator Peters and from Ken Xie of Fortinet about the important need for collaboration across the public and private sector. What are you looking for the public and private sector to do together to address the way that we monitor and report and address cyber threats?
Sure, thanks. And it has definitely been interesting being in the private sector the last couple of years. I've learned a lot, hopefully bringing some good best practices from the government, but also really just learning how industry thinks about cybersecurity, and in Google in particular, who has such long experience in having a security-driven engineering culture. So when we talk about public-private collaboration, I really learned this lesson in the government in talking to industry, but it's so much clearer to me now being out in industry, is defining what it is we're collaborating to achieve. And oftentimes the talk around public-private collaboration it's very high level. We talk about information sharing, we talk about better understanding of threats. Those are all noble goals. But really, I believe we need to get to specifics of what is it that we are collaborating together to achieve. From my perspective, I think there's two areas that I want to see, and I'm really just, it gladdens my heart to see CISA continuing the work, building the JCDC. We were a founding member of the JCDC as well. And really, to me, it starts from what are those functions and services they're so critical to our country, and in many cases globally, that we need to protect. We need to ensure that we understand any threats by an actor to disrupt or degrade those functions. Oftentimes we talk about our election systems, but there's a lot of other systems out there that are responsible for generating and delivering electricity, the stability of our financial markets. So many functions that every resident and citizen of this country and many other countries depend upon functioning are dependent on digital systems. So I think, and CISA has done a really great job of laying out what those national critical functions are. And so to me, it's really important to continue to drive to specificity. Who specifically is going to be aware of what systems in our financial markets are potentially vulnerable? Who's looking out for those threats? Is that threat information that the government receives getting to the owners of those systems with enough information to actually do something about it? So I think there's a lot of work that's good that it can continue in really driving down what are those indicators, what are those alerts and warnings that we need to protect those critical systems. And the second thing, which is sort of, I guess, kind of a matrix to that, would be working together to just eliminate entire classes of threats. We've been dealing with phishing for too long. Why are we still dealing with phishing? We need to just focus on some of these just pervasive threat vectors and just get rid of them. And the cool thing about being at Google, who really has the capabilities to have that mindset. Phishing has been a target for us for a long time. Getting rid of those by using multi-factor authentication with the security keys is proven that you can stop phishing in your organization. Getting rid of passwords. It would be amazing if we could actually work together to achieve those security benefits, but reduce the toil on users. And so to me, it's really that public-private collaboration that CISA, the National Cyber Director, pulling together, having that strategic view about what in our country are we trying to protect and who's responsible for what aspect of that, and having clarity between public and private sectors. And that second, equally important, how do we get rid of phishing? How do we get rid of ransomware? So those are big goals, but I think that's really where the collaboration needs to happen.
Well, and I think we see good signs that it is happening, and certainly the federal government's paying more attention to the need to modernize systems. We heard Chairman Peters talk about legislative efforts that he's still working on related to IT modernization. I wonder if you can talk to us about how we're doing as an industry in ensuring that policymakers put those cybersecurity practices, and in particular funding for cybersecurity, alongside the infrastructure investments so that we can benefit from IT modernization at the same time that we make these investments in infrastructure.
That's a great question. I would say we're doing okay. We're making progress. Even just people understanding the link between IT modernization and security modernization is a really important step. Years ago, they were treated somewhat independently. And you'd have folks that just, and still it is the case when you're looking at IT modernization, how do I get rid of this data center cost that I have to constantly deal with? And so they choose to move to the cloud. Those are important steps to take, getting rid of these legacy systems that just cannot be protected anymore. Those are really important steps to take. But what we talk to folks a lot about is when you're going on your IT modernization journey, it's an incredible opportunity for you to modernize security as well. And that whether that's going to the cloud or a combination of cloud and just modernizing your on-prem systems, but you can build in better secure software development practices. You can build in zero trust. You can inherit the security of cloud providers that they've been building at scale at a cost that you couldn't afford previously. So it's both about funding cybersecurity investment, but also making security modernization an explicit part of your IT modernization strategy and recognizing the mission outcomes that you'll achieve, not the least of which is just being able to manage the security and the expectations, productivity expectations of likely a long-term decentralized work from home organization and a generation of people that expect to be able to access systems and capabilities no matter where they are. So thinking more about how they build all of that security strategy into their IT modernization strategy is important. Funding is incredibly important. I continue to say this, agencies cannot have long-term modernization plans if they don't have a long-term strategy or an ability to create a long-term capital investment and operating investment strategies.
And one of the most significant developments in the last year, speaking of agency investment in cybersecurity, was the Biden administration's executive order on cybersecurity. Almost exactly, we're a little over a year now since that executive order came out. How are we doing on the call that executive order issued to industry and to government to pay more attention to these issues and to make the investments that are necessary?
Overall, I'd say we're doing really well. In Google, when the president announced the executive order, we committed to investing more than $10 billion over the next 5 years. So we're into that investment around strengthening cybersecurity, including securing the software supply chain, which is an incredibly important aspect of what the administration is driving. Also enhancing open source security. There's a lot of open source dependencies. So how do we make sure we're strengthening that? And then you also talked previously with Senator Peters about workforce. And so we committed to training 100,000 Americans in IT and security certifications. We need to see more of that. Other industries committing similarly. I like what the progress and the continued focus that the government has on driving to zero trust principles, getting clear validation of secure software supply chains. So I think we're making a lot of good tangible progress. It's hard. There's a lot more work ahead, but it's good work so far.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Jeanette, is that zero trust idea that you just alluded to. It's something that's core to ITI's advocacy on cyber, and wanted to ask you a little bit more, your concluding thoughts, if you will, on the importance of zero trust and what Google's doing in this area.
Absolutely. Google has been leading in this area since probably 2007, 2008, when we learned internally that the value that your corporate network perimeter brought you was not what we previously thought. And so building just completely new way of doing business and doing security, we call it beyond corp, so moving beyond your corporate network. Organizations now are really, they're embracing the concept. I think it's still a bit confusing to organizations. What exactly are we not trusting? What are we supposed to build? But the idea of being able to move outside of that traditional perimeter-based defense and have a security operation that allows, again, that productivity and that operational efficiency that technology can bring you, but to do it in a way where your users and your assets are constantly authorized and authenticated. That's how Google does it. We think it's a great model, but it's something that people are embracing, and we're just working through together of what does this mean to actually adopt this in my organization.
Jeanette Manfra is Senior Director of Global Risk and Compliance at Google Cloud. Jeanette, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to a conversation about consumers, because we've been talking about corporations, we've been talking about government, but there's also a consumer angle to cybersecurity that we need to talk about as well. And to do so, I'm pleased to welcome Darren Shou, who is Chief Technology Officer of NortonLifeLock. Darren, thank you so much for being with us today.
Jason, great to be here, and also to witness this 106th year of ITI being on the cutting edge of technology. Congratulations.
Well, thank you for that. We're happy to celebrate 106 years in operation, and technology strategy is exactly what we're here to talk about with you. We've talked about critical infrastructure over the course of this hour. Specifically, we talk about the energy sector, transportation, utility, but cyber attacks are launched against people too, and can have devastating economic effects. So should we be thinking about attacks on consumers as part of critical infrastructure as well?
Absolutely. Our lives are increasingly lived online. People live, work, educate, communicate across all their devices and spend more of their time online. I think what we need to think about is people are critical infrastructure, right? They are the ones that are operating the machineries. They are the ones that are keeping the economy running. They're the ones educating my child at school and the ones running our hospitals. And so the more that we can look at the individual, putting that at the heart of everything we're doing in security, right? The human, the person at the heart of everything we're trying to have a good outcome for, I think the better we're going to do, right? And so what we're thinking is, we believe it's a fundamental right and our privilege here at NortonLifeLock to help provide cyber safety to everyone in that way.
And how do we do that? Because not everybody has an in-house IT department, even at work, but certainly at home. So how do we get cyber hygiene to be top of mind for everybody?
So I think it's two things, really. When we talk about public-private partnerships, I think most people think about highways, roads, big infrastructure projects. And here I'm talking about people. But when you think about, let's say, a teen driver, my daughter isn't driving yet, but she will someday. Do we prepare the road for the driver, or do we prepare the driver for the road? And the answer is both, right? We need to actually invest in both. So consumers need to have two things. They need to have education, and then they need to have the tools that empower them to go live kind of boldly online without having to fear. We were just talking about zero trust. And I love that from an enterprise perspective, Chase Cunningham's work on that and others about the perimeter. But for a consumer, you've got to move from fear to 100% trust. That's where I want the consumer to be. I want them to be able to do anything online and then feel safe about it. For a consumer, it's all about a feeling. The more we can educate them, the more we can make them aware, the better they'll do. In our survey, we do an annual survey here, 63% of respondents said that they've taken more precautions online to secure themselves. But most of them still need help. And that's where we can step in and be a digital ally. All of us from any of our positions can step in and be that ally and give them that information.
And you have this great buzz phrase that you use called opting into cyber safety. And I really like that. And I wanted to ask you about that. We've seen cyber attacks in the headlines for literally months, if not years now. Some of the largest companies are susceptible to it. What does the average consumer need to think about in terms of opting into cyber safety?
Well, consumers have a choice to make. They can stay in the dark and accept the risks at hand, or they can proactively opt into cyber safety. And look, as they grow and change throughout their lives, we want to grow with them. And so then we need to meet the consumer anywhere they're at and give them those tools for each part of that, whether it's building a family, starting to work from home, getting the latest gizmo for their smart home. These are all examples of moments in time when the consumer needs to take a step back and think about what they need to do to be digitally safe. We all want smarter things, but I also want everybody to have safer things so they can, and that's where we're at, right? We're trying to drive that safer mentality for the consumer.
And one area that I think is particularly frightening to consumers and businesses alike is ransomware. We've heard our speakers each mention ransomware, and I know for NortonLifeLock, this is a big focus. What are you doing to help address this?
And specifically for the consumer, ransomware has evolved in a couple of ways, but importantly, it's kind of taken on a dual prong attack. Rather than just threatening to lock the device or lock the data in exchange for money, it's also become a way for them to extort the customer. So the second wave is if you don't pay for your data back, the threat is I'm going to release that data out there. And it might be sensitive photos, sensitive communications to go to your friends, your family members, your employers. It could be your financial information, anything you might find sensitive. So what we're really looking at is how do we make sure that we can proactively stop today's ransomware and also tomorrow's threats as they evolve, right? And so there's technology involved in that in terms of being cyber safe, and there's good hygiene that anybody can opt into as well. So that's where you want to start. Start with the hygiene. I think some of us have mentioned that before. Good password management, multi-factor authentication, but then also grabbing the tools that you have. And we have a freemium model that can fit everybody's budget where they're at.
Speaking of tools, I wanted to ask you as a concluding question to tie this entire hour together. What's the legislative solution that NortonLifeLock is looking for to help protect personal information of American consumers from cyber risks?
I love seeing more investment in people as a part of the infrastructure and as part of the industry. I'm gonna kind of turn around a little bit. I loved how Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas was having a talk, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, with the then CEO Judith Batty of Girl Scouts. And the Girl Scouts had just made a decision to award cybersecurity badges. I think there was like 18 of them. My daughter is young and she's in the Girl Scouts. And what I found so interesting about what the Girl Scout CEO said was, they didn't push for it. The girls were asking for it. And not only this, I think that people like my daughter and her Girl Scout troop are going to define it. They're going to improve it, and they're going to make it work for them going forward. I think that's what's really exciting about cybersecurity.
It is exciting, and it's nice to see interest in it and awareness. Darren Shou is the Chief Technology Officer for NortonLifeLock. Darren, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jason.
And thank you for being with us in the audience today for our terrific event with Senator Peters, Fortinet, Google, and NortonLifeLock. This is an incredibly insightful and timely discussion. The cyber landscape is constantly evolving, and so much policy efforts also to mitigate those threats. Please join us for our next event. Keep in touch with us at bridgeforinnovation.org to learn more. I'm Jason Oxman on behalf of ITI and our Bridge for Innovation team. Thanks for joining with us today, and we'll see you next time.